All right, Psalm 27, let's call this one the path to courage in this psalm that starts off with a relatively famous statement. Verse 1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? As David is going to go on to describe the way in which those who are unjustly arrayed against him are themselves about to fall. He's not going to dwell there, though. He is going to go on to talk about, once again, the place where he would like to dwell. Going back to the previous chapter, this chapter is going to say one thing he asks of God, and that is that he not simply be allowed to visit the house of the Lord, but that he have a permanent place in the house of the Lord so that he can take in its beauty, something that it's hard to do when you're just under stress. But when you are able to take in the beauty of a place, sometimes it goes along with a sense of peace that allows you to simply sit back and appreciate the things that it's not always easy to appreciate when you are always under attack. And so he's going to say, allow me to have a place in the house of the Lord that allows me to simply relax, take in its beauty, and inquire, presumably of even deeper levels of God's wisdom, as David is going to go on to talk again about the ways in which, even though, as we saw back in Psalms like Psalm 13, where he said, how long are my enemies to be exalted over me? He is going to say, now. That situation is about to flip, and he is the one who is about to have his head exalted above his enemies, as he is going to go on to say that he is not simply focused on the things that he is requesting from God. Here, specifically, a permanent dwelling in the house of the Lord. He's going to talk about the thing or the things that God has asked from him, saying, God has said to him, seek my face. And David is going to say, my heart has said, your face I seek. A passage I've had problems with for years, never really understood it, kind of blew by it. It's like, well, maybe I'll understand it someday. Well, it seems that God might have opened my eyes to this possibility. If you look throughout Scripture, no one could see God's face and live. Even some of his most exalted servants, like Moses, if they were able to see him, they weren't able to fully perceive him and live. And the times when they thought they did see him, he reassured them that they would not die for it. But it never said that they actually saw his face. And so what it seems that God is calling David to and calling all of us to is the kind of transformation that will allow us to see his face and live. The kind of transformation that is going to lead David to ask once again, God, please be gracious to me and merciful to me, and do not turn your face away from me, understanding that David appreciated the fact that he had the potential to make plenty more mistakes. But beyond that, he wasn't simply asking God to be gracious to him. He said, teach me your ways and lead me along your paths. That recurring theme that we're seeing not only through this set of 7 Psalms that we've seen before, as David repeatedly asks God, not just to teach him his ways, but to guide him along the paths that'll eventually allow David to see God's face and live. But he concludes by, as David often does, not simply focusing on his situation. He is broadly going to say, wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Thus, the title, The Paths to Courage. And the thing that seemed to catch my attention this time was the way in which our conditioning can prevent us from being able to simply take the courage that God makes available, because I had never really seen that whole concept of David saying, let your heart take courage, something I think he's going to mention again in Psalm 31, toward the end of Psalm 31. I always associated that with being courageous, meaning it's something that we actively have to do, but that's not what it says. It says be courageous. That seems to clearly implicate what we do, but it also says let your heart take courage, quite possibly the encouragement that God can send us, or the courage that God can send us divinely, but it may simply be the kind of courage or encouragement that he sends us through people. And the reason that conditioning seems so important to letting ourselves take courage is that we, I think, more and more exist in hostile environments, and part of our response to hostility is putting up defenses. And we've talked about it before. The whole concept of strongholds. They're not always bad. Sometimes they are necessary. But the difficult thing about strongholds is they are not always precise in the things that they exclude. And so to the degree we are conditioned by a hostile environment to raise up defenses, that keep out not only enemies, but those who God might send us to help bring us courage. My prayer for you is my prayer for me. Not so much that God would tear down our legitimate defense systems, but that he would help us through his wisdom to develop smarter defense systems. The kind of defense systems that we saw back in Psalm 25, where we said, a preacher by the name of J.D. Greer helped me understand the layers or the depths, the nuance in God's wisdom, meaning there's a level of wisdom where he helps us understand right from wrong, but then there is a deeper level of wisdom where we become so familiar with God's ways that we intuitively understand the directions in which he is leading us. And so God's best to us as we go forward in him, seeking a deeper, more intuitive understanding of the ways in which God is leading us, especially as he is leading us into a better understanding of who it's safe to allow inside of, as opposed to who it's safer to keep outside of our defenses.